if you can tell a CFO that you can save their company tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars from a licensing perspective with Microsoft, all of a sudden their ears perk up. I deal in a lot of like the security, audit, and compliance, user licensing.
This role that you play, how is that now elevated with the introduction of generative AI?
Hey, is my company ready to implement Copilot? And Microsoft will flat out tell you that if you don't have your security locked down from an Entra ID as well as an application perspective, that they don't recommend it.
Just hiding it from the interface is potentially no longer enough.
Actually started off learning the Microsoft on-prem Microsoft Dynamics products, Microsoft GP, NAV, SL, AX. Anytime you're interacting with a client, I think making sure that you're asking the right questions and not omitting questions.
Everyone's had the moment after the meeting where it's like, oh no, I should have asked this.
Being able to take those really complex technical topics and break them down into the functional side and saying, at the end of the day, here's the steps or process.
I think that's kind of a separating skill. How do you navigate those conversations with the client of like, no, I know this is more effort now, but it's much better for you. Trust me.
No, yeah, it's a great question. I've always kind of been
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Power Talks. I am your host, Griffin of the Citizen Developer channel, and today I am joined by special guest Alex Meyer. Now, Alex is a principal software development engineer where through his career he has abundant experience with Microsoft Dynamics 365. And from helping enterprise-grade companies develop useful business applications to passing financial audits and even being a subject matter expert when it comes to user licensing. He implements these ERP business solutions through his expert consulting skills that help separate him and bring value to those he works with. Not to mention, he leaves a substantial impact on the community through sharing his knowledge as a Microsoft MVP. Alex, welcome to the show.
Griffin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. I mean, before we even started recording here, I was telling you how a lot of the people on this show, and myself included, I mean, I eat, sleep, and breathe CE, sales, customer service, dip my toe in field service and marketing. I'm particularly excited to talk to you about the ERP side of the house,
Right.
And we will get to that conversation. But one thing that in getting to know you, you said is really important is the art of asking good questions. I kind of just wanted to give you the floor if you could expand on why asking good questions are so important.
Yeah, and I think it's, doesn't matter the industry that you're in, whether it's true consulting, whether it's ISV, any type of, VAR, anytime you're interacting with a client, I think making sure that you're asking the right questions and not omitting questions is the other thing, right? And assuming things is one of the things that can really either make or break certain engagements or, your solution or anything like that. A lot of the times when you get into situations with a customer or client, uh, if you have uh, you potentially might have been able to avoid certain scenarios, right? If you just ask that additional question, right, and don't assume that the client's using something in a certain way. An example of that, right, would be, there's been uh, instances where a client has a certain customization, right, and you can, if you're trying to, address that or expand on it, or, it's asking a question of like, why do you have this, right, or why are you, what's your process? Is this something that's required, right, because of something special that you do, or is it, maybe you just don't know about a certain feature in the system that actually does that, right? And so you can gain a lot of insight just by making sure you're asking the right questions.
Yeah, I have some experience where I've been on projects with we call them product owners, people on the client side of the project. I don't know how common that term is, but where the owners of the project team on the client side, sometimes they'll have really good almost technical expertise on the system that they use and the relationships and the way the data is structured, and sometimes you have product owners that don't, right? They just
Yeah.
know they click this button and users do this and this is what it kind of looks like and this something kind of happens in the background. How do you kind of bridge that gap or have those
Right.
like technical conversations with product owners that don't have that technical background or knowledge of their system?
Right. I think that's where, you can provide a lot of value if you have the ability to wear both those hats, right? So if you do have the technical background, or at least have somebody on your team that has a technical background, right? I think one of the very key points to, being a good whatever solution architect or product owner or some whatever the title is, right, is being able to take those really complex technical topics and break them down into the functional side and saying, at the end of the day, here's, the steps or process that we're trying to get through, right? And you kind of omit some of that more technical side, but you're trying to take those topics and get them to the individual and say, here's what's the process that we're trying to do, um, from end to end.
Yeah. Do you have like a good story or a good example of where either, good communication really helped in that situation
Yeah,
or there was poor communication, the inverse of that?
right. I mean, I think, like you said, there is a lot of the times where your end user of the system, right, doesn't have a whole lot of technical knowledge, right, of what is actually going on behind the scenes, and so having being able to break those complex topics down, in certain situations can be super beneficial. An example, right? So I deal in a lot of like the security audit and compliance, user licensing side, like you talked about,
Really
and
exciting stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Respectfully,
User licensing is an area that can get very, very complex, right? And there's a lot of it's complex to the point where sometimes Microsoft can't give you an answer of why a particular user needs a license, or you know what the licensing model actually is. Especially on the ERP side, it's a little bit more straightforward on the CE or Power App side. Um, and so being able to interact with end users and take those technical topics and break them down, sometimes even for Microsoft can be a true trait that you're looking for. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the key things, trying to take those technical topics and break them down in a way that end users can understand or relate to them, right, in a way.
yeah. And I think that that's kind of a separating skill
Mhm.
between good architects or bad architects, or
Right.
I kind of fill a functional consultant role, where I'm getting my hands dirty and building things within the Power Platform, but I'm also trying to bridge this gap, right? And I think that's the difference between good consultants and bad consultants, right?
Right.
Another question. Do you have like a couple tools? This is kind of a question that might be on the spot, but your experience, maybe blueprint sessions or just discovery sessions with the client. What kind of tools do you find are beneficial for kind of pulling that out of customers so that you can go and build what you need to?
Yeah. Some of those are tools that have actually built that are available, open source on like GitHub and stuff too. But that can help, you know, get to those really, uh, deep details that you're looking for that you need from a client perspective. And again, you're trying to abstract or, take some of that complexity away. So instead of having them run complex queries or, go in and, create, add this code to your environment, right? You can have an already pre-built package that you can give them, say, hey, click this button, it's going to export this, right? And it's going to give me the information that I need, right, to be able to help with your solution. And so, or your issue. And so that's, one of the things that has helped on that side. And the other thing, like I said, is we've built or out a series of questions, that like probing questions to ask clients, right? And again, these it's going to be different for each you know offering that you have, right? Whether you're a consultant or ISV or VAR, right? But building out a list of questions that you can ask as like a initial questionnaire, right? Whatever that is, um, can help standardize that process and make it a little bit easier to get the answers that you need.
For sure. I'm maybe this isn't the best thing to admit, but I find that I tend to utilize generative AI, whether it's Copilot or Chat
Yeah.
GPT, to, hey, I have this meeting coming up. The client does this or has this system. The project is
Right.
implementing this. Give me 30 discovery questions that I should ask, or whatever. And
Right.
and maybe just kind of helps like brainstorm. I've also had where say we had like a project kickoff meeting, and then next day or a couple days later we have the first true like discovery session. I'll take you can like summarize the kickoff meeting through the
Right.
transcript or whatever, and have it generate questions from that. I don't know
Right.
if you've played around with any of those generative AI tools, but
Yeah, no, I think that's an absolutely great use case for using Copilot and AI to do those meeting summarizations or meeting prep, right, for it. Because it's going to give you, the questions that you don't even think about asking, right, or following up with that potentially, might be beneficial for you.
yeah, everyone's had the moment after the meeting where it's like, oh no,
Yeah,
I should have
I knew
asked
it. Yeah,
this. This one
right.
question. It's like 2 minutes after the meeting ends, but
Yeah.
um, no, I think that's great. I would love to transition the
Mhm.
conversation and really just kind of get to know you a little bit better, and kind of how you've came to where you are today.
Right.
I would love to know how you first got introduced to D365, and how or why you developed this passion for the ERP side of the house.
Yeah. So, my background is in security and networking, actually. So, have a computer engineering degree from Iowa State. And after school, I was trying to find something that kind of fit that niche, and ended up finding a organization out of Des Moines, Iowa, which is where I'm located, that did security audit and compliance, and I was like, cool. Went and applied, and company was called FastPath at the time, and they did security audit and compliance tools for ERP systems. And at that point in time, I didn't really have any idea what an ERP system was, why clients would use it, things like that. And so I really started from the ground up, just with a background in software development and kind of learning the different systems. So I actually started off learning the Microsoft on-prem Microsoft Dynamics products. So Microsoft GP, NAV, SL, AX, NAV, right? So all of these different on-premise products, and then slowly started working. When Microsoft started moving things to the cloud. In like 2016, starting to really get into the Dynamics 365 suite of tools, right? And so that's kind of where that process kind of took, um, moving into the more cloud-based products there. And so, kind of along the way, I started not only doing the software development side of creating, the ISV tool set that FastPath had, but then also started doing, at least initially, kind of selfishly creating blog posts around internal blog posts that I would use as like, hey, if you're in, this ERP system right here, the things you need to know. And I had a coworker that at the time was like, hey, maybe you should look at, actually, publishing those out. And so that's where I actually started my blogs and things like that. So yeah, the I guess introduction into Dynamics was, I want to say a happy accident, but it was definitely not one that I was initially trying to get into. But I'm absolutely happy that I did. I think the entire journey across that from on-premise to cloud, both from a ERP perspective or the actual financial systems perspective, but also like FastPath went from on-prem to the cloud as well. Seeing that transition is been really exciting for me, in the in my career path.
Yeah. Would you say, kind of this the expertise that you have found yourself having with
Yeah.
security and licensing and everything that we've been talking about? I mean, was that like something that you thought you were maybe passionate about when you were first getting into it, or it kind of just fell into your lap and became your thing? Or I mean, how do we get there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, yeah, it's a great question. I've always kind of been interested, or ever since I was, back in high school, around security, and like at the time it was networking security, right? So that's where my degree is in, and that's where, I had a lot of background there. But I've always been one to, be interested in how do you secure the system and protect it from external threats, right? And where there are gaps, that you need to either look out for, or, in my line of work now, right? Actually, how do you, bridge those gaps, or how do you fill those gaps, right, to make it so that there aren't these blind spots in those systems, right? So I find it really exciting and really interesting. Like you said, it's definitely not for I completely understand people that say it's not for everybody, but it's something that I find really fascinating and enjoy working in.
For sure. I think that there's even more of a need right now with I was talking to another guest, and
Mhm.
he was saying that with the introduction of generative AI, where
Right.
I mean, when we're talking like security privileges within the system, I mean, just hiding it from the interface
Yeah.
is potentially no longer, enough,
Right.
because generative AI could now surface information that they actually technically had access to. Or like one example he was giving was like, if your like HR department is like storing people's bonuses in an Excel sheet in
Yeah.
SharePoint, that's they don't really access the link, or it's kind of
Yeah.
nested or whatever, people don't know it's there, but they actually aren't explicitly restricted from it. Like, you could ask Copilot to
Yeah.
you know what was this person's bonus this year,
Right.
right? And different things. So I think that, I mean, I guess a question here that I this is kind of spurred is, how do you find this role that you play as far as the importance of security? How is that now elevated with the introduction of generative AI?
Right. I mean, that's a great point. I've actually did, a podcast earlier about that exact topic, is, the security around, Copilot in general. And Microsoft has a great blog about that, and saying, the question that they are trying to answer is like, hey, is my company ready, to implement Copilot? And Microsoft will flat out tell you that if you don't have your security locked down from an Entra ID as well as an application perspective, that they don't recommend it, right? Because of situations like that. And so I think it, like you said, elevates the importance, of the uh, setting up your security correctly, not only for these like business applications, but your organization itself, and making sure that your organization as a whole is taking the security functionality, or the security awareness, right, extremely, has some sort of process in place, and has the ability to, very quickly determine where the gaps or holes are, because like you said, there's, Copilot and other generative AI are extremely powerful, and can offer your business a lot of benefits. But like you said, if you have these areas where maybe you've skipped over your, setting up security correctly, or you're using, you have your users assigned too much access in certain areas, they could very easily start probing the system to see what data they can get access to, and Copilot will answer it back, right? I mean, it's going to tell you, okay, here's what I found, based on what that user has access to. So it's definitely an area where I think, it, that Microsoft and other generative AI, I mean, they'll say, yeah, Copilot's going to follow the security practices, what you set up. And I think it's got to be on the end user then to say, are we ready from an organization standpoint to implement Copilot based on our internal security controls?
If you are thinking to yourself that you want to get into low code development or learn about the Power Platform, then I want to personally invite you to sign up for this completely free self-paced course that is going to cover everything you need to know to begin low code development today. Not too long ago, I was a complete beginner and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what the Power Platform was. But in just 2 years, I have gone from being an associate to a senior level consultant, and I can truly say that I love what I do. The content in this course is handpicked by me so you can understand the basics of the Power Platform and ultimately be prepared to take the PL 900 certification if that's something you're interested in. If you are interested, be sure to follow the first link in the description down below, and do not forget to use the promo code YouTube at checkout in order to get the course for completely free. This is going to give you immediate access to the entire course so that you can start to change your future today. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Now, I must admit, I do not consider myself a security or licensing expert. I might consider myself a security novice, but definitely not a
Right.
licensing novice, even. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's clear why this is a bad habit per se, but like,
Yeah.
what are some things that, architects and consultants need to keep in mind when developing solutions as a whole in regards to security privileges?
Yeah. I think there's that one question actually is I don't uh, is a entire session that I've done in the past, and I'm actually doing at this the Summit conference later this year, coming up with another
Very
Microsoft
cool.
MVP about like common security mistakes. Um, and really there's a couple different things that I think can really help individuals or companies, right, that are going through this process, regardless of whatever ERP system you're using or system you're using. And it's really to the first thing is to make sure that security is a part of your implementation plan or a part of your you know review process, let's say, right? Even if you have already implemented it and you know your security is not in a great state, right? Um, having uh, if we can fix that problem by when you're implementing the system, whatever system that is, making sure that security is a part of that implementation timeline. A lot of the times it gets pushed to the very end and you don't even, it's rushed, or you don't have the internal knowledge, either your partner or you internally or your organization doesn't have the knowledge to actually set up security correctly. So it's whatever the system gives you as a default, that's what everybody's going to get assigned, right? Or everyone gets assigned sysadmin, right? Or a super user or equivalent. Um, and then the other thing is to have these periodic reviews of your security, right? So security is not a one-time exercise, right? It's not something you can set it and forget it. You really need to have periodic reviews of it to say, because is this access still appropriate? Because no organization is static, right? You have people joining the org, leaving the org. You have the mover, joiner, leaver um, process, right? And so if you set up your security correctly, but you don't do the periodic reviews of that security, um, you can very easily, undo all of the work that you've done, right? Because, all of a sudden your users are assigned way too much access. No one's getting their access checked and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are kind of the two big things. There's a lot of very technical stuff you can do as far as like least privilege, and a lot of the systems are starting to implement that, right? Just in time access and things, least privilege security, right? There's a lot of very detailed topics you can get into, but a lot of the systems, like at least from Microsoft, are starting to implement some of that already natively. So you can, utilize those systems as well to ensure that your, security is correct.
Yeah. Have you ever, I'm sure you have, but have you ever been on an implementation where the client was kind of just okay and asking for just everyone being super users, as the term you've used, where they,
Yeah.
how do you navigate those conversations with the client of like, no, I know this is more effort now, but it's much better for you. Trust me. How do you navigate those
Right.
conversations?
Um, so there's a couple different ways that you can do it. The uh, Not to use scare tactics, but you can tell them about the horror stories of people that don't do it, right? And then have to come back and spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix issues that then they did themselves. The other part to it, and the way that I've found, at least on the ERP side, to make that process a little bit easier is, um, at least for F&O in particular, finance and operations, is that your licensing of the tool is tied directly to security. So if you can tell a CFO that you can save their company, again, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars from a licensing perspective with Microsoft, if they set up security correctly, all of a sudden their ears perk up, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit easier of a conversation in certain systems because of how they're licensed. But at the end of the day, right, it's comes down to uh, trying to figure out what the overall goal of that organization is, right? Or what requirements they have from an audit perspective, right? Because if they're a privately held organization and they don't have to meet internal external audits, right? Then it may come down to the fact that they they'll take your suggestion, say thank you, and they're going to do their own thing. But if they're publicly traded or they have some sort of audit requirement, HIPAA, GDPR, SOX, right? Then you can basically tell them like, hey, to meet these requirements, right? You're going to have to go through this process. We can either do that process now, and it can be much easier, or we can do it later, and it's going to be much more complicated and harder and more expensive. So
Yeah. I love the kind of tangent we've gone down here, but I wanna take it back to kind of
yeah,
where we were, I don't know, 10 minutes ago, talking about how we kind of fell into where you were or where you are now, and I guess kind of my background. So I studied entrepreneurship and accountancy in college. And pretty much in my last semester, I don't know if it was just because I didn't care for my professor or I was going to be graduating and it just felt all too real all of a sudden. I was like, I do not want to be an accountant. And so I never actually sat for my CPA or anything like that. And pretty much probably all of it is pretty much gone and left. But nonetheless, even though I kind of had this background, I fell into the CE side, and not so much of the ERP side, and where maybe my background or just my head knowledge of accountancy could have benefited me. Do you see that, like, in your experience, does a background kind of in the field help as you are, maybe going into a position like a software development implementation of an ERP system? Maybe I could rephrase that question, but does that make sense? I guess what I'm
yeah,
what I'm saying there. Okay.
yeah. I mean, I think it's having experience and seeing how clients are actually using the product are always going to be it's always going to be beneficial, regardless if you're functional or technical, whatever your role is, right? Having actual end user experience is always going to be beneficial. Now, is that the only thing that's going to help you, like you said, right? Having the background in your accounting or in your particular area, whether it's warehousing or like you said, field service or sales side, right, of the application, right, is always going to be that's as another part to it. So I think they're complementary in the sense, obviously in the field is something that's very hard to teach in school, right? To show here's how the system's actually being used, right? They can teach you the system itself, but um, how end users actually use it or companies actually use the system is going to be very different in certain situations. So
Yeah.
I think it's very good to have complementary sites, right, where you have the core background, so you say here's how things should look, and then you have the in the field of here's how it actually is working. Right.
Sure. Yeah. What it I don't know, maybe any advice you'd have, say somebody is in kind of a professional services career, or they're doing something like that, and they, for whatever reason, they came across this episode of us talking, and now their interest is now peaked into you know software development, implementing solutions for things that they're currently doing. What
Right.
advice would you have for somebody that might be in that situation?
Yeah. um so I think there's a couple different paths, right, that you can go down. Obviously you can go down the path of going into the actual ERP system, right? Whatever that one is, whether it's SAP, Oracle, you know, uh, Microsoft Dynamics, either BC or F&O, right? Whatever that system is, and they can go in and actually do the development on those systems, right? My background, I've done development across multiple different Microsoft ERPs in that area as well. But that's absolutely option one. The other option, as you probably know, is using something like Power Apps and connecting to those systems, right? And using a more, an easier, I wouldn't call it, zero code, but low code development, right? To, bring data into a more maybe user friendly platform, right? To allow them to still do some whatever they're trying to do, and there's limitations in both ways on what you can do and can't do in the system. But I think the advice I would have is probably uh, try to find something that interests you and dive in. I think would be the best one. There's tons of different power apps, training online, free training that you can do. If you're going to get into the more ERP side, there's more pointed trainings for that. I'm going to do a shameless plug. I'm also at Summit later this year. I'm doing an 8-hour course with another MVP on, F&O development and administration, right? So finding a course like that, if you're wanting to get into that area, can be extremely beneficial. It's a little bit harder to find those ERP specific types of development, whereas Power Apps is more generalized, so it's a little bit easier to find some of that. So, yeah, but in either case, don't get frustrated. Know that there are people out there that are willing to help, and look for the trainings that are and the resources that are offered online, to help you along your way.
Yeah. Awesome. Absolutely nothing I think I could possibly add there. But I wanted to I guess transition the conversation again. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, um, I've recently been on a project where the client was implementing both ERP, Microsoft Dynamics ERP applications, as well as CE applications, and it was the
Right.
first time I had been on a project where the company was actively developing solutions for both. And I guess I just thought it was interesting. I'd love to hear your side, your opinion on it. Of um, like, what are some things that you try to keep in mind as the maybe leading the ERP side of the conversation when a company is also developing a CE solution,
Yeah.
and kind of how these kind of two different project teams work together with the client to ultimately make a cohesive, better solution.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, or a great point to do as part of implementation, right? You're never, even though it may feel like it sometimes, you're never in a silo, right? So anything that you're doing in the ERP is could potentially impact the sales side or the customer engagement side or the Power App side or your Power BI side, right? Or your HCM side, your Workday or Salesforce, whatever you're going to connect to, right? Very rarely are there processes that are siloed that are only going to impact one system. And so you really have to make sure that you have the visibility, especially if you're the solution architect or you know product manager or whoever, right, to actually be able to see how these systems are going to interact with each other and how those could, what somebody does over here could impact something that somebody does over here, right? So I think that the you're going to uh, you're in my view, right? I think that Microsoft has a very appealing pitch, right? If you are looking, if you're coming fresh, right, and you are looking for an ERP and a CRM type system, right? I think you have a very good option on the Microsoft side because their ERP and CRM systems play well together, right? So you're not fighting that integration point. And they're all moving towards, the one goal, right, of being that one quote unquote solution. So it's you start to have these, and I'm going to use a consulting, these synergies, right, between these two systems, right, because the data is feeding one, the data is feeding the other, right, and you start getting the systems talking to each other and overall benefiting the client. So um, yeah, no, I think it's something that is uh, exciting to see, especially if the customer is coming from very manual process or they're coming from QuickBooks or something on very low tier, and all of a sudden they have this huge you know uh, system for them to you know gain value from it. It's an exciting opportunity.
Absolutely. This client, they were basically had um, two systems, a CE system and a an ERP system, and they just weren't talking to each other. So it was just a lot
Yep.
of, you know, the ERP ID, where and it was just a text field, in the CE
Yep.
system, and then they would copy that and paste it into the search bar, and then copy this and
Yep.
paste it back, and that was ultimately right. The goal was to build them a system where it could all just talk to each other, and different things like that. Are there, I don't know, this is maybe another question that's on the spot, but besides just the ability for them to communicate, are there
Mhm.
other maybe synergistic benefits to having, using the entire suite of Microsoft Dynamics as opposed to just, CE and just ERP?
Yeah, I think, the other parts to it that maybe sometimes get a little bit lost, is something that you brought up before, is where you start to put Copilot on top of it, right? Because Copilot's going to run, it's going to be the back channel behind the scenes, right? So you can ask questions, start to ask questions across the business applications, right? So you're not just asking CE, you're not just asking ERP, you're asking your entire business suite, right? What's our, biggest, where's our the biggest potential, right, from a client perspective, right? And it can go and pull data from both systems and be able to, um, you know, surface that for you to digest. The other side is the report, like you kind of mentioned, was the reporting side as well, right? Because um, when you start to consolidate some of these systems, right, you can, again, if you're going to use something like Microsoft Fabric, or something else for data warehousing, data lake, or whatever, to actually warehouse some of this data, right? Then you can put Power BI on top of it. You can start to, point, you could actually point Copilot at that and start asking, or, machine learning, and look for, on top of it, and start asking questions about your data on a larger scale as well, right? So you start to gain some of those other efficiencies, right? Because of the technology stack that you're using.
For sure. No, that's awesome. I would love to, I don't have good segues here in this
Yeah.
episode. Normally I try to be pretty smooth with it, but that's okay. Nonetheless, I'd like to, spend the last 10 minutes or so
Yep.
just talking to you about, I enjoy, um, being an MVP is not a prerequisite to come on the show. If anyone out there, I hope, I know I'm talking to a lot of MVPs, but they're just nicer, I guess. Let me just say. No, I'm just kidding. But you're a Microsoft MVP, and you've mentioned
Yep.
that you started this blog thanks to the recommendation of a peer or a colleague,
Yep.
and different things. I'd love to just hear what does your Microsoft journey, your Microsoft MVP journey look like?
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I kind of referenced earlier, right? I started creating. Well, I first noticed that there was a gap, right? There wasn't a lot of Microsoft documentation in the security audit compliance user licensing area, especially around ERP systems. But it, for most systems, right, that's not an area where a lot of documentation occurs anyway. Uh, but I noticed that there was a gap, and so I started creating internal, knowledge base articles for myself, just to make sure that I was, could easily find that information and be able to reference it again. And I had a colleague that said, "Hey, maybe you should start putting those online." And so I created a blog, and didn't really know where that was going to go, or what it was going to lead to. And that was right around the time Microsoft went in the cloud as well. So there wasn't a whole lot of information out there to begin with. And so I kind of found my niche in that area. And just anytime I, found something interesting, or found, something that had changed or anything like that, I wrote a blog about it. And the other rule that I have is that if somebody asks me a question, if I get the same question twice, I have a blog post about it, right? So that's kind of how I started generating content, going forward. And so eventually, I started getting, noticed in the community, for some of these things that I was posting. I started speaking at, conferences, whether it's like the Summit conference I talked about, in the fall, or the DynamicsCon Live conference. I went overseas, to the Summit Europe, or Summit EMEA, when that was still going on. Um, I need to get back there for the Dynamics Minds conference as well. But I started going around and speaking at these conferences about, these uh, topics that, not a lot of other uh, presenters were talking about. And finally ended up getting noticed by some Microsoft folks, and got nominated as an MVP as part of that. So Was officially accepted in November of 2019 and have been renewed every year since. So actually just went through the renewal process of that,
Yeah.
which is always a little nerve wracking. But yeah, no, it's a great program, but it's one that I never really was striving for. It was more of it just happened along the way. And I think that's kind of a common theme that you'll hear. I'm assuming with other MVPs as well. Like even if that program didn't exist, I would still be doing the exact same community contributions because it's just something I like to do and like to be, a part of. So the Microsoft MVP stuff is a fantastic program, but it's kind of a bonus for me because I just like, being that the subject matter expert or the uh, source of knowledge in this area.
Yeah. Two things to add on to that. I will say one, as far as you created blog posts just for
Yeah,
yourself to refer back
yeah,
to. That is a common theme I've heard as well. And I mean, I created a video, not a shameless plug. I created a video on just like how to start a trial environment, like a
yeah,
Office E5 trial environment and add dynamics sales, whatever. And I use that every 2 months or whatever, when trials expire
yeah,
to do that. So I completely relate to that. And secondly, of that, every MVP I've talked to, or they will all say that it kind of just became a thing. That
yeah.
they were just contributing and people enjoyed the content. And
Right.
I'm sure I would say nobody truly accidentally becomes an MVP, but just like their desire to share or
Yep.
run a blog or different things like that then turned into that. What
For
one
sure.
one other question I had is just your. It sounds like you enjoy like public speaking engagements
Yeah.
and everything like that. I think that's super cool. How would say somebody whether they're pursuing MVP or not, or they feel like they have something they want to share, how would someone go about getting their foot in the door and being successful at you know delivering something well and speaking at one of these events?
Yeah. That was actually a big hurdle for me. By my nature, am not a super, you know, uh, I didn't like to do public speaking, prior to this. It wasn't something that I did. I was kind of, for lack of a better term, thrown into the deep end. I was kind of told that I was going to start doing these and start doing, these different sessions and things like that. And I'm looking back, I'm extremely happy that it turned out the way it did because I don't know if I would have done some of the activities that I did had I not had that. But what I will say is that two things. One is that every conference, whether it's your local chapter or these larger conferences, are always looking for new speakers. So they actually reserve a certain amount of speaking slots for first-time speakers. So um, that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is that there are sponsors, quote unquote, or mentors is probably a better term, right? That each conference has, where if you are a first time speaker and you want help, to with a session or anything like that, that you can reach out to them and you can get feedback on, here's potentially an idea or here how you could go about it, and to kind of help with that process. So uh, the one thing I will say, kind of the same idea from the coding side or programming side, right, is if you have any interest in that at all, I would, feel free to reach out to the organizers of the conference or even people that that are attending the conference, um, that are maybe speaking and, ask them for their help or in almost every case I think the dynamics community as a whole, or Microsoft community as a whole, however you want to look at it, is very helpful to begin with. So I think there's a very good chance that you would find somebody that would be willing to help. So don't let that be the barrier, I guess, to not pursuing it if it's something that you want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. To kind of wrap up the episode, we every episode ends with what we call the after hours happy hour, and this is kind of just a space to sit back, kick your feet up, talk about anything but work.
Yeah.
We're done. We're done talking about super exciting user licensing and
Yeah.
security again, respectfully. Um, But and getting to know you, you mentioned that you're passionate about golf or other fun
Yep.
hobbies. I mean, what who is Alex Meyer, and kind of some things you're passionate about outside of work?
Yeah, so I am passionate about golf. I do like to play. I live on a golf course, and that was by design. That was one of my requirements when my wife and I were looking for a house. So definitely something that I like to do. I've played ever since I was growing up. But I do have, two young boys right now, 4 and 2, right? So a lot of my free time outside of anything work related or golf related is obviously dedicated to them and spending time with my wife as well. So we're doing a lot of, toy construction stuff, cranes, anything that has wheels. My boys are probably playing with it. So, yeah, do a lot of, railroad building and construction site maintenance, I guess, outside of my
Yeah.
my work time for sure. So,
That's fun. Yeah, it's funny you say 4 and 2. So I have a younger brother. It's just the two
mhm,
of us, and I'm 2 years older than
yeah,
my brother. And so it's funny. I mean, I couldn't possibly give you some advice, but I will say that the younger one will always be the perfect age to annoy the older one.
oh, for sure.
Because love you, Trevor. That's my younger brother. Love you, bro. But growing up, it's when I was in eighth grade, he was the annoying sixth grader. When I was
Yeah,
a senior, he was the annoying sophomore. Whatever. So it's,
right.
but nonetheless, I think that as we've gotten older, the gap, I mean, 2 years
Right.
really isn't a gap. I know a lot of people with much bigger gaps, but that's
You're right.
it's fun you mentioned that because it reminds me of myself in a weird way.
Right.
Yeah, and we weren't necessarily so into when we were kids things with wheels, but huge Lego fanatics. We had
Mm,
this
yep.
we had this 4 foot by 8 foot, basically homemade, table. It was basically a big piece of plywood, and then kind of just a box, basically a big
Right.
white painted box, and we had a piece of blue painter's tape down the middle, and my side was my Lego base, and the other
Of
side was
course.
my brother's Lego base. All the way growing up, and
Yeah.
every dollar we got from birthday and Christmas would go to a new Lego set, and every single time. So um, that's super
Oh,
fun.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
super good. Yeah.
Definitely keeps you
Anything?
busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, four-year old and 2-year olds, you got busy lifestyle. You got
Yeah,
not enough
for sure.
time in the day. So
No, no, no.
that's that's awesome, Alex. Man, thank you for coming on the show. If somebody
Absolutely.
wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so I do have my website, alexdmeyer.com. That's my professional website. It's where all my blogs are hosted. You'll find links to my YouTube channel, my GitHub, basically all of my social media um, stuff is all linked there. So that's probably the best way to contact me. You can also obviously, find all of my info, public, email and things like that on there as well. So if anybody wants to reach out and chat about security and licensing, happy to do it. Uh, but yeah,
For
and
sure.
then like I said, looking forward to if any of you viewers are coming to Summit later this year in San Antonio. Absolutely, come find me, and we can meet up and chat.
Absolutely. All of the links to everything you're talking about, I'll put down in
Yep,
the show notes or in the description
perfect.
down below. Alex, man, thank you. Thanks for being here once again. Thank you to you for sticking to end the video. My name is Griffin Lickfeld, the host of Citizen Developer, and I'm excited to connect with you in the next one.